Howdy, folks. Today we are looking at the men who built America, captains of industry. We've got that going on here in our Prezi. You have to understand that societies are built on a lot of things, but at the end of the day, you have to build an economic base. You have to have something that's going to make money, um, because not everybody's going to be their own business owner, right? There's a lot of people in this world. All of you, most of you, probably have parents that work for somebody else. Maybe not, but maybe they have their own business. But a lot of our parents work for somebody else and get paid to do that work, and that's kind of how this goes down. So we're going to look at some of the early major players in the economic system in the United States. Now, in the early days, we've talked about some of the merchants in Boston. Last year we talked about them. The Paul Revere's, John Adams, um, Samuel Adams, some of those people that were doing a lot of trading in and out. And that was kind of the original basis for the economy in the United States. And it wasn't just that. I mean, there was obviously agricultural trade going on, which we know about. But now we're talking about post Civil War, and we're going to talk about what takes the United States from being kind of just another country to becoming a world leader with an extremely strong economy. And we can chalk it up to a number of people, but the eight that we're going to bring up today had a very, very large influence on it. First off, it starts with the railroads. Anytime you have goods that need to be transported, or anytime you have a good, you have to get it to the people, and so you need a way to transport it. And what the railroad did is it allowed people to transport stuff not just along the coasts and where there was water, but across the land. And they could do it in high capacities. As you can imagine with a train, I mean, we see trains come through all the time. And we can, when you stop and think about the capacity, the amount of stuff that can be on a single train, that's a pretty hefty amount of stuff you can move that I can make in New York City, that I can make in Philadelphia, that I can make in Charleston, South Carolina, and then ship it to the West where the nation is growing to where Iowa now is, where Minnesota, St. Louis is a fledgling town. Chicago is becoming a growing town. So the railroads allow these people to make stuff, but then get it all over the place quickly and cheaply. That's the biggest thing, is cheap, because you don't want to have to. It's going to cost you a certain amount of money to make the product, and you can make a certain amount of money when you sell it. You don't want to have to tie up all of your profits in transportation and other costs. So the cheaper you can ship it, the better it is for you as the business owner. So it all starts with the railroads, and what I mean by that is the railroads really started to expand to the west. Eventually, we're going to hear about in fact, I think it's already been brought up about the Continental Railroad and how they join up in Utah. But this is where it starts. This guy by the name of Cornelius Vanderbilt. Originally, he had steamboats, and he recognized, you know what? I can make a lot more money if I were to start doing something with the railroads. Now, at the time that this is starting to happen, there's a lot of little short line railroads, meaning they would run 100, 200 miles of track. And they just went back and forth. Maybe they only had one track or two tracks or three tracks and just a couple of engines. But there was all kinds of them. And of course, they have to compete with each other for the competitor's money or for the shipper's money. And so competition means lower prices, right? We like that if we are the business owner. Excuse me, we like that if we're the consumer. And we like that if we are the person that's using the business, in this case, the producer of the goods. If I'm, Joe Blow from Kokomo that is shipping 100 pounds of my product, if I can pay 1 cent a pound instead of 2 cents a pound, that's half the price for me. And that's what I want. Vanderbilt recognized the other side of it, though. He realized that if he were to buy out the smaller railroads, nobody would be able to compete with him. Okay. Remember, we've talked about this before. I know we brought up the example of when you go to a stadium and you want to get a drink. Um, what you do is you have to pay a ton of money. Like if you're at a football game or a baseball game or a concert, it costs a ton of money to get a pop. Why? Well, because there's only one person selling it or one group selling it. Now I realize there's multiple concession stands, but it's all owned by the same company, so they get to set the price. There's no competition to try to get you to go to a different vendor. So what happens? A monopoly is created. And we'll just read it off. The exclusive possession or control of the supply or trade in a commodity or service. Only one place to get it. When we think about monopolies around here, some would say that Fairway has a bit of a monopoly in New Hampton because it's really the only place to get groceries in town. Now, there is Dollar General, but it doesn't have the same kind of selection. There is Quick Star, but again, it doesn't have the same kind of selection. And it's not a true monopoly because there are people that will go to Hy-Vee over in Charles City, or will go to Walmart in Decorah, Waverly, or Waterloo. So they still have to compete with some of the surrounding stuff. But Fairway has sort of a monopoly on the grocery market in New Hampton, so their prices can be a little bit higher if they want, because they're the only one in town. That doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing. It is what it is. Um, so Cornelius Vanderbilt realizes if he creates a monopoly, and yes, this is the same concept of the game of Monopoly. The whole point with the game of Monopoly is to buy up the whole board, right? Same thing. He realizes if there's no other railroads to compete with him, everyone has to come to him. Now he can set the price because he doesn't have to compete with anybody else. And that's kind of what he was looking to do. And quite frankly, when you look at all of these leaders of industry, that's essentially what they were trying to do. The steel industry, same type of thing. It's Today, steel is used in the building of almost everything. If you're sitting in a chair right now, those legs you're sitting on are probably made of some type of steel. All the tables that you're sitting at have steel legs on them that are holding that up. There's a ton of steel in the walls of our building, all kinds of it. Okay. And that was a huge, like steel is a huge innovation. We didn't always have it. We started out with something called cast iron, and cast iron is okay, but it gets really brittle and it corrodes and it's not as strong and it doesn't last quite as long. Now, it doesn't rust, it kind of corrodes over so it won't rust out, but it's just not as strong. Where steel, basically, they use the Bessemer process, and what it does is you're blowing air through the steel to knock out all of the through the molten iron, meaning you melt iron down so it's red hot and liquid, and then you're blowing air through it and you're knocking out the impurities in the ore or the iron ore, and what you're left with is this Bessemer steel, and it's a much more pure type of metal that has much more strength to it, and it's also very malleable, meaning it's bendable without losing all of its strength. And you'll find out that the railroads are made of steel, but in today's day and age, buildings, all kinds of stuff. I mean, you see steel everywhere. All right. So who's the guy behind a lot of it? This guy here, Andrew Carnegie. You ever heard of the Carnegie Cultural Center? Yeah, it's named after this guy. What happened is Andrew Carnegie, as you can see, was born really, really poor in Scotland, immigrated, and eventually he's going to create a steel company. He works his way up through the system. He worked for somebody else is what happened, learned how to kind of run the books, learned how to run a business, and then decided, you know what, I can do this myself. And so he starts his own steel business and builds it into a $475 million fortune for himself. He saw that there was a huge need that was for a stronger metal that was also bendable. When it says usable, it's the malleable part. He recognized that need and he capitalized on it, and he built U.S. Steel. U.S. Steel still exists. It's in Pittsburgh, and that's the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's where this all comes. That's where that all comes from. It's the Steel City, baby. They make a lot of steel in Pittsburgh. They always have. They always probably always will. Andrew Carnegie, like I said, or actually it's Carnegie, is the one who comes up with, or I shouldn't say comes up with. He didn't come out. He didn't invent anything. He just took the process, made it more manageable, quicker, and made a fortune off of it. But then later in life, he wanted to give back, and so he literally funded libraries. I mean, he literally paid for them all across this country, including the original library in New Hampton, which is now known as the Carnegie Cultural Center, or the Carnegie Cultural Center, as you've seen on the east end of town here. That was originally one of the Carnegie libraries that he paid for to build and to put books in. So, pretty great man. And as you can see here, that's what we've got going on. Oil is the next big thing. Black gold, right? Something about the Beverly Hillbillies that came up through the ground, came up bubbling crude, something like that. That's how they got rich. Well, oil is worth a lot of money. The original use for it was for kerosene and kerosene lamps, and then they would use kerosene to heat buildings in the same way that we use natural gas today. Similar product, quite frankly. But what we found out is that there was a byproduct of kerosene that was extremely useful, especially later on, and it seems to be a hot topic all the time, especially when we start talking about the price of it. And that would be gasoline. This guy here, John D. Rockefeller, is going to be the one who makes his big fortune in oil. This was the richest man in the world. Quite frankly, everyone talks about Donald Trump and how much money he has or supposedly has. Rockefeller makes Trump look like he's poor for his time. Now, his net worth is $1 billion in his age, at his time. If you want to find out what he would have been worth today, take $1 billion in one of those inflation calculators and find out what it says. My guess is he's been worth a little over $1 trillion in today's money. That's a lot of money, folks. This guy is the reason why Teddy Roosevelt later on is going to have to crack down on with stuff and on antitrust laws, because this guy had so much money he once bailed out the U.S. The U.S. was going to go broke. He wrote a check to the United States government to bail him out so that they would have money to keep the country going. Okay, he was a ruthless businessman. He had a business called Standard Oil. In that business, he did a couple things. First off, he bought out other oil companies so that he didn't have to compete against them. But then the other thing is he wanted to control every aspect of the production process. So it wasn't just that he wanted to control the plants that he had where they were creating this stuff. He also wanted to control the shipping. And so rather than having to ship all this stuff on a train, what he would do, he said, you know what? I don't need the train. Forget it. Which really did not sit well with our good man Vanderbilt from just a little bit ago. Oh, yes, these guys all knew each other, and they were working together. Vanderbilt, he basically cut Vanderbilt out and said, and in a lot of ways, he cut Vanderbilt off at the knees, because originally Vanderbilt was hauling hundreds, if not thousands of barrels of oil a day for Rockefeller. Well, Rockefeller says, I can do this in a cheaper way. What's the way? Pipeline. If he puts in a pipeline, or for one, if he creates his own railroad, or for two, if he puts in a pipeline, he doesn't even have to have the railroad infrastructure. He can just pipe the stuff straight to where he wants it. And that's what Rockefeller's going to do. And basically cuts off Cornelius Vanderbilt at the knees and took away a very large portion of what Vanderbilt was shipping. Rockefeller obviously made a lot of money. The building there is 30 Rockefeller Center, named after the Rockefeller family, very famous family in the United States. Nelson Rockefeller was probably the most recent one. I believe he was vice president for maybe Carter. I'd have to go back and look. But John D. Rockefeller was a very good businessman. But the next thing we looked at is electricity. Electricity is going to come a long way. The big thing is Obviously today electricity is a big deal. Electricity is a thing that we have to um, use every day just because of what we're doing. Um, and it's something that came around the turn of this century. Basically, what's going to happen is you're going to have this fight over whether we should use AC or DC uh, power, and it's essentially high voltage or low voltage. DC power is low voltage. It's a lot safer if you get jolted by it. Think of like getting zapped by a car battery as opposed to getting zapped straight out of the wall. AC current is a lot higher voltage, it's a lot more dangerous. Now, DC current doesn't carry the charge very far. That's why you see DC current systems within cars, because the runs for the battery are or off the battery are not that long. Where with AC, you can push that stuff through high power or high voltage lines, as you've seen outside or even buried in the ground now. Um, you can carry that over miles and miles and miles. And so that was the fight, and it came down to two people that were pushing this. AC was Nikola Tesla, and DC was Thomas Edison. And it was really a very ruthless fight where they pulled some dirty tricks, trying to make things make each other look bad. Particularly Edison, he was at one point went out and electrocuted an elephant with AC current just to try to make everybody scared, so they would go with his design instead. Um, what ends up happening is AC does win out. Edison goes on to invent a number of things. He was worth about $12 million when he died. Tesla pretty much gave away all of his designs. He wasn't worth anything. He died slow, cold, and alone and kind of lost his mind. But his design is the one that ends up winning out. And so it's alternating current that's in each one of your houses. It's in the school and all that stuff. The automobile is going to be the next big development. Okay, it allows travel where you want when you want. Now, there's also public transit. The trains provided public transit, the railroads, I should say. But what if I live in, say, New Hampton, and I want to go to, say, Chester, Iowa? Probably not going to be public transportation. There's not going to be a bus. There's not going to be a train, plane, whatever. How do I get there? Furthermore, what if I want to leave at 6 a.m., but the bus doesn't come in until 9 a.m.? Automobiles give me the freedom to go where I want, when I want. That's huge. And you could get to almost any location in America at any time at that point. Roads were a little primitive, so a lot of them were dirt ruts, but you could do it. This man, Henry Ford, is the reason why it works. He basically says, I want to put one of these in every household. Okay, I want to make sure that everybody can afford to have a car, because if they can, for him, if everyone can have a car, that's plenty of people to buy them, and that's the big key here. He's trying to sell to as many people as he can so he can make money. So Henry Ford, creator of the Ford Motor Company, develops the first. I won't say the first automobile. He did not invent the automobile, but what he did do is invented a moving assembly line process that allowed him to create this product fairly cheaply and be able to get it out to the masses. And it didn't just have to be the wealthy, it could be everybody who could have one. And one of his famous lines is, you can have the car in any color you want as long as it's black. Just a random tidbit thrown in there, but there you go. So now we get to a corporation. What are corporations? Corporations, as it says here, a company or a group of people authorized to act as a single entity, legally a person, and recognized as such in a law. In other words, something is incorporated. All right, so you're acting as, yeah. Okay. J.P. Morgan had a corporation. What he was doing is he was diversifying. Rather than saying, I want to get into business A, business B, business C, What he's eventually going to do is start buying multiple businesses and had a corporation called the JP Morgan Trust. And the idea behind that was he owns all these different companies so that he is involved in all these different markets. Well, that's sources of income coming in from everywhere. As you can see, he's worth $880 million. You've probably heard of JP Morgan. If nothing else, you've heard of JP Morgan Trust or JP Morgan Company. You've probably seen commercials for that. This is the guy who's going to buy Edison's electrical stuff. He's going to create General Electric out of that. That was Edison's company. He'll buy Carnegie Steel. He'll buy Westinghouse electricity. He's going to buy out Vanderbilt's railroads. He would loan out money, and then he'd reap the benefits. So J.P. Morgan basically was a financier. He had money, he financed projects, or he bought stuff, and then he made the money off of that, or off those projects. J.P. Morgan was and still is a very influential. He's dead, but the legacy he left is very influential in our country, and that's where we get to a trust, a group of corporations run by a single board of directors. Okay, you'll see that there's 5 restaurants listed to the right, and if you notice, it seems like those restaurants often are tied together. So there's a Long John Silver's and A&W in the same building up in Cresco. And it's like, wait a second, those are 2 different restaurants. How could they possibly be working in the same building? Or you see KFC and Taco Bell together a lot. Now, wait a second. Those are 2 completely different companies. Why are they in the same building? Why can I order off the same menu? Well, here's why. Originally, they were individual corporations, individual businesses. And what they did is one would buy the other out, or one would merge, and they want to keep the brand. Okay? And so what you do now is you basically create a trust. Okay? And the idea is now these brands are all part of the same company, essentially. It used to be called Tricon. Now it's called Yum Foods. If you ever heard of the Yum Foods Center in St. Louis, this is what it is. It's this company right here because they own these 5 brands, and I think a couple other ones. But that's why you see Long John Silver's and A&W together in those buildings, because yes, they're different brands, but they're not different companies. The money's all going to the same place. But it offers them a chance to give you multiple options for what you want to eat, because some people love Long John Silver's. I love their chicken strips. They're outstanding. The fish is pretty decent too. And some people really love A&W. Some people really love the cheese curds there, which I love those too. You know, some people would prefer KFC over Taco Bell or vice versa. We haven't really talked about Pizza Hut, but everyone loves Pizza Hut too. So anyway, that's what we've got going on with this, and that's how we'll end it out here for you on this one. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for your time. Now let's get to work.